Welcome back. You may not see a lot of headlines about this, but we are in a serious crisis when it comes to Black unemployment. On average, joblessness for Black men is 3 times worse than what it is generally assumed, especially when compared to white men. In fact, a recent report from the Center for Economic and Policy Research found that closing the gap between white and Black employment rates could add $30 billion to Black communities. This would be an amazing and significant boost in the fight to reduce Black poverty in the U.S. Urgent action is needed from policymakers in order to slow this crisis and close this ever widening employment gap. Dr. Algernon Austin is here to tell us more about this report. He is the Director for Race and Economic Justice at the Center for Economic and Policy Research. Good evening. Thank you so much for being here. I want to start with a brief synopsis of some of the troubling trends that the report uncovered. Can you, tell us what you found in the report and if you were surprised by any of the findings?
I was quite surprised. The important thing for people to understand why the unemployment rate, the official unemployment rate, undercounts Black men is that if you have difficulties finding a job, if you've been rejected several times, for example, you may get discouraged and stop looking for work. But immediately, the moment you stop looking for work is the moment that the Bureau of Labor Statistics say you're no longer unemployed, although you're jobless. If you're living in an economically depressed community and you see that there are no jobs around and you don't apply, and because of that, you're not looking for work, you are not counted as jobless, although you do not have a job. So when you take into account, unfortunately, because of incarceration, because of people who are formerly incarcerated, Black men who are formerly incarcerated have serious difficulties finding work. When you take into account those people who are not being counted by the BLS, the Bureau of Labor Statistics, we find that it's 3 times the official unemployment rate. But we can go even further. I talked about the men who were released from prisons. There's still significant numbers of men in prison. And when you take them into consideration and also take into account the high mortality rate for Black men, although Black men are deceased, they may still have kids who need their support. So when you do a full accounting, the difference is not 3 times, but 4 times the official rate when you take into account the incarcerated and the deceased. And that number, it goes from the 30 billion to 50 billion. 50 billion that Black communities are losing every year because of the problem of joblessness for Black men.
Wow. And it's something that it seems to me we just don't talk about enough. And thank you so much for lifting up the underreporting of the jobs report, because the White House, for sure, always wants to tout the job report. And, it just misses the mark a lot of times on what's really happening in our communities. Your report also found that tighter labor markets are actually good for reducing joblessness among Black people, but they don't actually help with reducing the joblessness gap. So talk to us about that and about the gap.
Yeah, we're seeing, what we're seeing with the labor market now is more or less what's happening to Black men all the time. So the unemployment rate is going down nationally. And yes, people are touting that. But the fact is that there's still millions of people who are not entering the labor market because they don't want to get COVID, they don't have childcare, they retired early because they're afraid. So it's not fully counting joblessness. And yes, when we recover, more people of all races, including Black men, will be employed. So that is a good thing. We do want a recovery to where we were in 2019. But even in 2019, there were still many Black men who, because of racial discrimination in the labor market, weren't able to get jobs because they were returning citizens or formerly incarcerated. They weren't able to get jobs because they lived in very depressed communities, maybe similar to Detroit. They weren't able to get jobs, and we ignore those men. We don't count them, and it's very misleading. So yes, we want the recovery, but we need more, because we have to go against the discrimination against Black men for being Black, for being male, for
Mm.
being assumed to be an ex-offender, even if they might not be an ex-offender, and because, so unfortunately, many Black communities are suffering from years of underdevelopment and have low amounts of jobs available.
Hmm. The pandemic has done so much damage to the labor market for everybody. And the unemployment crisis is even more daunting when you take into account that this issue has spanned for over 2 decades, probably longer than that. Yet, workers have really taken matters into their own hands, it seems, and are speaking up, and they're fighting back against unfair conditions. You just kind of alluded to the fact that some people are choosing not to go back to work. There was a point where employees were announcing, all the employers, I should say, were announcing all these crazy incentives to try to get people to come. Do you think that there's a power dynamic shift right now, where power is shifting to the hands of the workers? And is that something that Black men might be able to benefit from?
Yes, there is a power shift, because as we've just said, there are many people who are afraid to go back to work or not able to go back to work. So yes, so we are shifting, particularly for low wage workers. We're seeing significant increases in wages, and wages are only going to increase when there's that shift in bargaining power. So all of these things are helpful. They're helpful to the Black men who are employed in those sectors, but unfortunately, we're going to still need more. So we're going to need something like we did in the Great Depression. So I talked about, unfortunately, many Black communities are economically depressed. And what we did in the Great Depression there were large scale subsidized jobs programs through the Work Progress Administration that got people employed and helped revitalize the economy. So in these depressed Black communities, as well as you were just talking about the border, as well as depressed, economically depressed communities around the border, where you just talked about 30% poverty rate. In Native American communities, you have serious joblessness and economic depression. And even in Appalachia, you have white communities that are suffering with high levels of joblessness. So we really need to not forget these communities. And the federal government needs to do what they did during the Great Depression and really support job creation through federally subsidized jobs.
You know, you are using language that makes me think about a New Deal for Black America, for sure. And it seems to me that Joe Biden's Build Back Better is an attempt to bridge a lot of the systemic issues and the structural gaps that you're talking about. And I wonder if you think that there is anything in Build Back Better that might get to some of this employment gap that we're discussing.
Well, yeah, the proposals that the Biden administration have put forth are really amazing, and it's unfortunate that they're so stymied. There's a lot of good things. I and a colleague are looking at just the Medicaid gap fix. As you may know, many southern states with very large Black populations did not expand Medicaid as they were encouraged to do under the Affordable Care Act, under Obamacare. And Build Back Better has a fix to address that problem, in spite of the state's resistance to actually helping their citizens get health insurance. So the Build Back Better has ways to address that, and address a number of other problems that we're facing as a country. But unfortunately, this problem is not fully addressed by Build Back Better. Again, it's something that we're not paying attention to, and we haven't devoted enough attention to. And I think we will need even
Yeah.
more, assuming we can get Build Back Better, which is a huge assumption. We would still need even more to address the problem.
Yeah. Oh, well, I'm so glad that we are amplifying this conversation tonight about what's happening with Black men and employment. This was such an interesting conversation. Dr. Algernon Austin, thank you so much for being here on Amplified. Appreciate you.